The revolt in England began slowly and quietly, with pickets and pamphlets. But if she didn't get married, she had only the narrowest opportunities if she was to remain respectable. For new inventions are opening up a few new jobs for women. Why should she worry about political rights? In 1897, scattered groups of non-militant suffragists united in the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies. The Industrial Revolution, which was to bring about the emancipation of modern woman, led the fight for women's suffrage for the next 50 years. The authorities intensified efforts to subdue the unruly suffragettes. And the women struck back with a new and terrible weapon. That the revolt of the women had its beginning. Fashionable at home were the social rights of the age. But 6 more years of speech-making and petitions brought them very little closer to their objectives. But few people realized at the time to what lengths the suffragettes would go. England got a shock. Again refused to vote in 1912. Yet it served only to excite public attention.
And the most determined were the parading, crusading, never-say-die suffragettes.
The cause of British suffragettes to the attention of the world. These militant and dedicated women were out to make history. To Mrs. Pankhurst, it was victory.
The storm gathers. Its shadow envelops mankind. It is the eve of cataclysm. History is being written. Those 2 memorable days carry a momentous story for future generations. Women undergo military training and undertake tasks which will relieve men for fighting. Call is sounded and women fall in for service in their country's cause. The departure of the school children was, in particular, a triumph of orderly precision. From the crowded towns, children in their thousands left homes and parents behind and went away to live in the safety zones under the care of their teachers. The object of women's enrollment in the services enable more men to be spared for the sterner duties of war. Khaki uniform replaces the peacetime diversity of fashion, for in the auxiliary territorial service, women undergo military training, but how it is to be avoided no one can imagine, and the preparations for civil defense go on resignedly. And thousands are in the picturesque land army. On them the country will rely for a large part of the increased acreage which must be put under the plough. The skill of these experienced hands will provide the homegrown food that the necessities of war dictate. Inspire that confidence which comes from knowledge of one's own strength. Indeed, there can be few industries nowadays in which women have no share. While in wartime every industry becomes national in its importance, are seen as vital factors in the struggle. To these paid labours we must add the contribution which is purely voluntary and introduce women's voluntary services.
Like the world at large, the fashion world is beset with confusion. Is it mini, midi, or maxi? Every woman gets to choose, and that is women's lib.
Girls no longer read books intended solely for teenage girls.
The publication in 1963 of Betty Friedan's bestseller, The Feminine Mystique, caused women to re-examine traditional roles and to protest old stereotypes.
Their literary taste is as adult as they themselves want to be. What's happened? Just one thing. She has reached her teens. Does she really know everything? Often the teenage girl acts as if she does, or thinks she does, and their musical taste exhibits a similar desire to be grown up. In reality, the opposite is true. Far from knowing all the answers, the teenage girl has reached the age of curiosity.
During the Miss America pageant in 1968, women conducted demonstrations on the boardwalk in Atlantic City.
Her world is uniquely her own. Everyone else is rigorously excluded. Except other teenagers. Since being bright is very in these days, it's then that the search for answers becomes intense. Answers to what? Literally everything. Today, more teenagers really care about learning what they are taught. They also earn the right to the community's respect. The right to be regarded not just as kids, but as people.
A new movement for women's liberation is launched, and once again protesters take to the street to support their demands for total freedom. Economically, politically, socially. The number of working women continues to grow.
This emerging consciousness would soon be known as women's liberation. The times were changing.
The women of America are marching, more of them in the East than anywhere else. marching for their rights and to mark the 50th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote.
Trained, skilled, utterly reliable, and a willing servant of humanity. Conscious of her responsibilities, calm and confident in emergency and crisis, her future devoted to an honored service.
Then more demonstrations and posters and pamphlets aimed at women as much as men. The reaction of the authorities was instant and vigorous, yet it served only to excite public attention. The ladies courted arrest and were obligingly carried off to jail. In one period of 5 days, 124 were arrested.
Scattered by tear gas that police say they fired after people began damaging the building.
How can one start to describe the 101 industrial jobs performed by women? Dangerous jobs in many cases.
Discovered the total anatomy of our oppression and of what they've been doing to us. But we do know that it's happening. We're on to it. And unless they accept this and stop developing just another new line to cope with that, there are going to be fewer and fewer relationships going on between men and women.
Women complain of being looked on and evaluated by sex and not ability.
War always involves inconveniences for neutrals who are not concerned. But Britain endeavors to extend just and courteous consideration to all the aliens within her gates. But despite the changes and interruptions of normal life, the business of the country must go on.
Business and industry open new doors and provide greater opportunities for placement and advancement as the number of working women continues to grow.
We demand freely available childcare facilities that will ease the burden of the working mother.
And other high priestesses of the movement.
And all the minorities, that all of us must stand up together and say, no more. The inhuman system of exploitation will change, but only if we force it to change. And force it together.
Queen Victoria herself spoke up sharply about what she called the mad, wicked folly of women's rights.
The US Supreme Court could be about to overturn the nationwide legal right to abortion.
And even though the future looms especially large in their young lives, they're primarily interested in the present.
For many, this is a day of celebration, but also one of reflection of how far generations of women have come.
And that right there is enough to fight like hell for the Equal Rights Amendment.
All they really care about is controlling and suppressing women.
This country's in a much better state than other countries around the world, but we're still not completely fine with treating people fairly despite who they are.
The fight goes on, but we're getting closer.
The struggle for women's rights, had come a very long way, maybe not all the way. I think like a lot of women of my generation, we just took it for granted.
Argues that the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision legalizing abortion across the US was
pro-control.
And bring your knees together, and now we'll roll over onto our backs and lie down.
The fight today is about righting a past wrong.
All of our rights are just being taken away.
They chalked their slogans on pavements, paraded in sandwich boards, sold their newspapers on the corner, picketed the House of Commons, and flooded the streets with leaflets and handbills.
Hey, women, standing there strong together.
Here, their curiosity is boundless.
In 1897, scattered groups of non-militant suffragists united in the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies.
As the fight for equality continues, people at these events hope that change can come from strength in numbers.
And there's also a sense that they are in this fight for the long haul, that this is a protest not just for tonight.